Hey guys, welcome back to Mimir. A few weeks ago, I published a piece on Substack about everything that I had done that week to build my skincare company, Kelly. I walked through the manufacturing question marks, the formula trade offs, and the math I was mathing on a very sophisticated Google Sheet. I hit send and went about my life feeling like I'd published something other early stage founders would not only find value in, but find refreshingly honest. However, before I posted it, my fiance had actually cautioned me against it. He worried that being that honest could make me look unprofessional, messy, that I could unintentionally delegitimize myself as a founder. And I heard him out. I think it's important to pause on that kind of a question because I do believe that there are times when you should keep things to yourself, but transparency and demystification were exactly the reasons I started Mimir and The Well, so I published anyway. A day later, though, a friend and fellow first time founder texted me telling me that she read my article, loved it, but she cautioned me about how much detail I go into, especially in the beauty industry, where people are very protective of their formulas and their suppliers. So that was the second oh shit moment. And then the following Monday, I opened my weekly Monday Girl newsletter, and the very first hot take in the email was this TikTok of a founder saying how she's not building in public anymore. She called it a strategic mistake. She said it made her look smaller, messier, and less credible. So, in case you're counting, that's three people in 5 days, all with the same warning. So I was like, okay, universe, damn, I hear you. I am admittedly a chronic oversharer and I'm okay with that. If you've ever met me, I probably said a little too much, a little too early. But when the universe sends such clear signs of caution, I listen. So I sat with this qualm for a good while. Like, was I wrong to want to be transparent about my struggles and my process? Was my idealism actually going to work against me? You've probably seen very polarizing debates online about building in public. You have one camp that's sort of screaming that radical transparency is what consumers want and is the best way to build a business and a personal brand in today's day and age. On the other hand, the other camp is criticizing you for sharing too much, that it's making you look like you don't know what you're doing, which, like, first of all, does anybody know what they're doing at this stage? Both camps are loud. Both camps believe they're right, and both make good points, which makes founders like me who are just trying to do the right thing feel more than a little confused. I think a lot of founders are frustrated because the desire to build in public comes from a good place. We're sick of the nonstop barrage of glamorized founder content that floods our feeds. We ourselves want the real, honest tea about how things actually get built because we know it's not as polished as it looks online. So, in an attempt to shed light on what's actually going on, we end up offering everything they have. And I want to say that there's nothing wrong with wanting to be open about your experience, but not at the long term cost of your business. And that's the rub. So, I was starting to wonder, is building in public truly the wrong thing to do? I really didn't want that answer to be no, but my ego is not so fragile that it doesn't know when to admit defeat. So, I went hunting for the real tea. And I learned that while there's a clear argument for why building in public can be a terrible idea, there's also data to suggest it's a good strategy. Actually, 92% of customers trust user generated content more than branded content. And founder led brands consistently outperform legacy brands among Gen Z and millennial buyers on every single trust metric. Through my quest, I also came to the conclusion that the question of should you build in public isn't yes, and it isn't also no. It's not even a question per se. It's a set of decisions, a strategy, if you will. And once I started seeing it that way, it made the whole idea of building in public way less scary. So that's what I want to give you today, because I think you should build in public, just correctly. So, in today's episode, I'll be breaking down what building in public as a strategy actually means and the repeatable framework you need to execute it effectively, including case studies of when building in public is done well versus when it's not, so you can see how to apply the framework in practice. Hopefully, this helps you build your audience early so you can have a successful first launch. Because frankly, that's why I went on this frickin' rabbit hole journey in the first place. I know I need to build my audience, but I don't want to do it at the expense of my company or my personal reputation. And I also didn't even know how to even start. So if that's you too, then let's get into it. Let's set the stage a little bit and start with, what does building in public even mean? Someone defending building in public as a strategy is usually defending audience building before launch, whereas someone attacking it is usually attacking the founder who tweets about every business pivot in real time. Those are obviously two very different things. So I think the reason building in public is so fiercely debated comes down to misuse of the phrase. It's typically used as a like black or white, do or don't, but I think people are actually bundling several different choices, sharing your idea, your progress, your numbers, your failure, your strategy into one ideology. But pause for a second. Think about how different those things actually are. Sharing your progress, for example, is like, hey, I got my first sample this week. Let's unbox it together. That builds excitement. People want to watch and root for you. Now, compare that to sharing your strategy. Here's exactly how I'm going to build this thing. That's a blueprint. And the person most likely to actually use a blueprint is another founder. But people call both things building in public. And if I like put on my marketing hat for a second, that content has completely different desired outcomes, reasons, risks, and frankly, audiences. So before we keep going, I'm planting my proverbial flag in the ground here. From here on out, when we talk about building in public, it refers to a marketing strategy that succeeds or fails based on how well you implement it. It's not an identity, it's not a personality. I think as founders and as people who consume founder content, the right question we need to be asking is not, should you build in public? It's, how are you executing the strategy of building in public? So now that we've established that, I'm going to walk you through the framework of how to implement build in public successfully, regardless of what industry you're in. Half of the reason I was incentivized to make this episode is because I also needed to sit down and start making this kind of content. And I too was like, where the hell do you even start? So the below framework is based on my experience in growth marketing, plus talking to other founders about their strategies, and then of course verifying the logic with my first hire, Claude. First of all, stop thinking about posts individually and start thinking about content pillars. For those of you not in marketing, content pillars are simply just like 2 or 3 buckets that every post will fall into. And the reason I want you to think about it like that is so you're not like racking your brain wondering what you should talk about. And in theory, you then have 2x more ideas because you can create 3 posts per week, 1 per content pillar. So, how do you determine your building in public pillars? I think it really comes down to 2, optionally 3 questions. The first is, what are you building and why? Let's call that your founder pillar. The second is, what industry are you selling in and what do you know about it? That's your category pillar. And finally, who are you outside of the work that you do, which is like your life pillar. And this is the third optional pillar. Some people won't touch their personal life at all, and I think that's totally fine. I'll get into this in a little bit more detail later, but the purpose of this pillar is to show that you're, like a little more well-rounded, show some personality, you have hobbies and like a life outside of your work. But again, not necessary to share if you don't feel comfortable or you don't want to. So let's use me as an example of what content pillars could look like. So mine center around the actual progress of building Kelly, i.e., why I'm starting this company, branding updates, working with suppliers, etc. Secondly, content around beauty, like how I feel the industry isn't serving the need I'm trying to fill, giving my opinion on relevant industry topics, etc. And then thirdly, some like light life stuff sprinkled in when I feel like it's relevant to me as a founder. So for example, maybe a 5 to 9 after my 9 to 5, if I'm going to a beauty conference, etc. It's just something that gets people to feel like they know me as a person. Also, because this content is going on my personal account, then I can sort of feel free to share things like vacation updates if I really want to. If you're thinking about your pillars as you'd listen, I genuinely recommend capping your pillars at 3. You might feel a desire to add more, but that might not be sustainable for your phase of life. And this strategy is useless if you can't maintain it. It does take time to build momentum, and momentum is what creates successful launches. So don't overcommit. Also, for your audience, they want a certain sense of security that they know what they're getting from you. So if you have like 6 different content pillars, it might become confusing or overwhelming for your audience. And you might also be wondering, Maddie, why did you choose founder content and category content as your content pillars? For building in public content, especially before you have a product to sell and launch, there are 2 audiences that your content speaks to. The first is founders who come to you for the journey that you're on, and 2, the customers who come for the product that you're building. Your founder pillar feeds the first and occasionally the second audience. Your category pillar feeds the second and occasionally the first audience. And the life pillar is what makes your customer want to buy from you specifically. Think about it this way. You're asking random people to buy something totally new from someone who has no clout. So you gain trust through vulnerability, relatability, and transparency. So that's sort of like step one of the framework. And step two here is where the framework gets a little bit more intricate. So you have two or three main content pillars, and you're thinking to yourself, slay, Maddie, I can do that. I'm already thinking of what my content pillars are. I'm so ready to start creating content and filming. Slow down there, partner. We're not racing yet. Sorry, my Disney adult just came out. But seriously, there's a little bit more to this than just the three content pillars. When people say building in public, they're usually referring to that first founder pillar. So, in order to avoid the risks we've been discussing throughout the episode, we need to zoom in. I'm going to give you the sort of how to do founder pillar effectively. Because if I were to send you on your merry way at this point in the episode, you'd probably fall into the most common pitfalls. So, inside your founder content, there are really 5 micro content pillars that you can share, which is your idea, your progress, your numbers, your failures, and your strategy. But what nobody tells you is that every single one of those has trade offs that need to be carefully scrutinized in context. So let's talk about your idea first. This is usually the first thing you're ever going to post about. It's like what you're building, why, what's different about it. And what you gain by sharing your idea is people understanding and remembering what you're about. But the trade off here is around the level of detail. So for me, I'll tell you exactly why I chose the ingredients I did for our moisturizer, but I will not give you the formula by percentage so you can like go and remake it with your branding and your marketing strategy. So you want to be really intentional with the level of detail you're sharing about your idea. It's a fine line, but when it's written successfully, great content is produced. And it's frankly, I think also just genuinely important. As a founder, you will be asked to talk about this stuff for the rest of your tenure, not just on your own personal social media channels, but at conferences, in magazines, on TV, on podcasts for VCs or investors. Like, think about creating, building, and public content as practice for what's to come, because you absolutely need to be able to articulate your business clearly and concisely. And this is a great way to rehearse that. Second micro pillar is progress. This is an easy one, and it's where most of your content will live in the early days. It's like how you're progressing along the journey of building your first sample, first order, a win. What you gain is people rooting for you and wanting to know what's going to happen next. People like to feel like they got in on the ground floor of something before it becomes mainstream. Think about how many indie artists or brands or musicians you're like, oh my gosh, I knew them before they were so big. So think of this micro pillar in the same way. It's exactly what you need at this stage, but the trade off for this pillar is twofold. First, even real progress can make you look small if you're not strategic about which progress you share. And here's what I mean. Telling me you pivoted because your supplier couldn't source the ingredient that you wanted, that's great because it shows you making a smart call under pressure. Whereas telling me you don't know how to find a contract manufacturer makes you look lost. Both of those are technically behind the scenes, but only one of them makes you look like you've got your shit together. So share the progress that shows momentum and be careful with the stuff that's really just you being confused out loud. The second trade-off to the progress pillar exists if you confuse it with the next pillar, which is failures. I want to stress here that failures and progress are not the same thing. Most founders think they're posting a progress update, and it's actually a confession that something went wrong. A failure shared well is one of the most relatable things you can post. And what you gain is real trust. But here's the cost, and it's a big one, so pay attention. A failure shared with no lesson attached reads as incompetent instead of honest. So failures come with a condition, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. I've seen this pillar done really well when a founder doesn't expect a product to sell out, for example. They often then have to deal with tons of customer backlash and delayed restock times. So this is a great moment after the fact to say, yep, we fucked up, but we're excited to announce that we have fixed the problem. We have a more steady stream of inventory. So you want to get on the list to be the first to know when we're back in stock next week. That's how you admit your mistakes, but come back stronger from them. The fourth micro pillar is your numbers. Sharing your numbers takes balls. What you gain when the numbers are good is instant credibility because that kind of transparency reads as confidence. A good example of this is a founder who hits their first $1 million month and turns it into an Instagram carousel about the things that actually got them there. That's a number with a lesson attached, so people learn something instead of just watching you flex. There's also a version of this that gets frequently clowned on, which is the founder flashing one really like shiny revenue figure while staying cagey about everything else, like churn rates or, in beauty, for example, lifetime value to CAC, without the surrounding context. That post reads as bragging at best and a little scammy at worst. And there's a trap door sort of underneath all of it. The second that you post a number publicly, you are on the hook for it. So post a huge month and hit a slow one, and now your slow month is public too, or it should be. So numbers can be a superpower, but only when they're strong with a lesson attached and only after you've weighed what happens if next month it doesn't look as good. Generally speaking, I recommend staying away from this unless there's like a really clear, really good reason to share them. Finally, the fifth micro pillar is your strategy. And let me be clear what I mean by strategy because it's broader than people think. It's actually how you plan to win, your positioning, the channels you're betting on, your pricing, your growth plan, what's next on the roadmap. And what you gain by sharing it is looking really sharp. You look like somebody who knows the game, has a plan, but this is the most guarded pillar for a reason. For example, in a category in which things get copied really fast, laying out your specific plan hands the next founder your playbook. And also, you unintentionally sort of lock yourself into positions publicly that you might need to walk back 3 months later because, things don't always go according to plan. So here's the line I would draw, which is sharing your point of view on the category is great and how you're building your company in that context is really helpful. But you won't see me posting my exact launch calendar, my supplier, like the 3 influencers I've locked for launch week or something. And I'm going to sound like a broken record on this episode, but strategy shared after the fact is often safer than strategy shared live. Telling people how you grew once it worked is a lesson. Telling them the plan before you've run it is a leak and a liability that can have the opposite intended effect fast. So talk strategy in generalities, share the specific once they've played out, and keep the live plan under wraps. Whew, okay, I know that was a lot of information and a lot of things to think about, but in case you've been worried and furiously taking notes, fear not. In the show notes, there's a high level version of this practical framework so you can copy and paste it and come back to it whenever you need it. Before we move on, though, there is one more part to this framework that is critical. So once you've created your ideas based on your macro and micro pillars, you're now free to go create your scripts and film your content. And once you've done that, the last question is sort of like where to post. And I cannot stress this enough, but your build in public content and your brand content should not live on the same channel. You need to be strategic about where and with whom you share your build in public content. The brand channel, I would argue, should stay polished for the consumer. The founder channel stays honest and foundery for the people who come to you for that information. For example, for me, the majority of my founder content lives here and on my Substack. What comes from there will get repurposed to my personal IG and TikTok and eventually LinkedIn. You will not see me talking about founder content on Kelly's brand IG or TikTok. And one exception that I want to call out because there's always exceptions. There will be times when the founder comes onto the brand channel. And when that happens, make sure it's about why you built this and the choices you made to serve the customer, not your latest fire drill. And that's a really freaking important distinction to make. If you take nothing else away from this episode, let it be this. And I will continue to beat this into your brains. But when you are sharing a confession without a lesson, you're essentially asking your audience to hold you up. Whereas a confession with a lesson invites them to learn alongside you. And this is the single most common mistake founders will make. If there's no lesson attached to what you're saying, the only thing people learn is that you don't know what you're doing. So whatever pillar you're posting from on whatever channel you're posting it on, make sure it teaches something. My friend Amanda, who's also a fellow founder, always reminds me to talk about your scars, not your wounds. So make sure if you're sharing a failure or a learning lesson that you're already in progress of solving it or have solved it. And listen, no one expects you to be perfect, but you just want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success because you will figure it out. You just want to make sure that you're showcasing your resilience, your dedication to your customers, and your savvy as a founder. So that's the whole framework. Let's do a quick recap. First thing you're going to do is start by figuring out what your 2 to 3 main content pillars are. You already know that founder content is going to be one of those. So, to make your life easy, I would suggest your industry or your category as the second one. If you want to copy my pillars, feel free. I want to call out that if you're worried about sharing your life as the third pillar, that's totally fine. Like I talked about at the beginning of the episode, it's not necessary. I've even heard of some founders creating an entirely new account for their founder content and keeping their personal Instagrams or social medias private. That way they can share their friends and family on the private one and keep the founder stuff strictly business only. If you're confused about what life content would look like on the founder profile, it could be stuff like what your day looks like as a founder. It could be pictures of you working at a coffee shop. It doesn't have to be vacation dumps or like you getting married. So after you have your main content pillars, you want to zoom in to the founder pillar and determine which of the 5 micro pillars you're sharing from. Evaluate the content and mitigate the costs. Then you're going to route it to the appropriate channel. And finally, you're going to finish with one last gut check before you post, which is, are you speaking from your scars or your wounds? If there's no lesson attached to your learnings, then scrap it. It's going to do more harm than good for you. So now that you know the framework, I want to walk you through some case studies of what good building in public looks like versus when it's done incorrectly. Everything we'll talk about below sort of shakes out to a misuse of the above framework. So this next section should ground you in concrete examples to give you clarity on how to apply it correctly and maybe also some inspo for your own post. For these case studies, we're going to be looking at 2 founders who both share very similar content. Their struggles, behind the scenes, and vulnerability. For one of them, it works, and for the other, it doesn't, and she actually decided to stop building in public content entirely. We're going to start with the latter. Naomi, the founder of Good Dogs Only, a dog brand accessory, is the founder from that Monday Girl TikTok I mentioned at the top of the episode. Here's what I noticed after diving deep into her content. She has a recurring format that's literally titled, quote, "Things that absolutely humbled me this week," unquote. Compelling at first glance, right? It feels like good clickbait to get the people to stop and pay attention. In every segment of those types of posts, the hook is negative, built on self-deprecation. And it's relatable, a little bit funny, probably does good numbers, but I want you guys to notice what happens after watching a few of these in a row. In one video, she's talking about pitching to retail stores, and she talks about what she was feeling in the moment. Quote, "Truly imposter syndrome, putting it lightly," unquote. A customer walks up while she's mid-pitch and she just folds, like she jokes and recounts her inner thoughts to the viewer. Quote, "Sorry for being an inconvenience. Sorry for taking up your time. I'm just going to pack myself up and go," unquote. In another video about shipping, she says, quote, "I don't know how mail works. I don't know how shipping works. And I'm always confused," unquote. And then in a third video, she talks about her first international order and she asks, quote, "Is this even worth it?" unquote. And finally, in a meme post, she writes, quote, "Spent all your budget on inventory because you forgot marketing costs money," unquote, with the melting face emojis. So I'm sure you have some immediate thoughts about how all that sort of settles, but let's run her through the framework. What is she sharing? Failures, progress, and a dash of strategy. The problem, I think, is not what she's sharing per se, but how. She's sharing it raw on a channel that I think is the brand's official channel, but it's a little bit unclear because the content is all her. And she almost never attaches the resolution to the challenges that she's facing. Remember, confession without a lesson asks the audience to hold you up. And I think that's what's happening here. She's sharing from wounds. Post after post, the audience is watching her scramble, not be triumphant. And I think it's unfortunately exhausting to the audience. Like, people love a good comeback story. They want to watch the hero triumph. I don't know how many of you guys are fantasy readers, but I am an avid fantasy reader, and there's truly nothing worse than the main character just getting like beat from battle after battle and the author not giving us a single shred of hope to cling to. Like, that's fine for a couple of chapters, but when it feels like that for the whole book, you're wondering why you're even reading. Is it worth it to stay to the end? Should I just Google how it ends? That is what this type of content is doing to your audience online. And here's the kicker. I think Naomi can actually pull this back. In one of her videos, she says, quote, "If I look at the overall sales for the week, I'm way higher than I thought I'd be. That's a win," unquote. That's the relief the audience is looking for. That shows her competence as a founder, but it comes late, buried by the whole things that humbled me framing. And if that win was at the center of the conversation, how she turned things around, I think it could be really compelling. So when Naomi says building in public isn't working for her, I think she's half right. The content was probably hurting her, but I would argue that she should keep trying. Take a step back, reevaluate, and try again using the framework. The post that made it on the Monday Girl newsletter, like tons of people remixed that and it got a ton of views. So I think it'd actually be really cool for her to leverage that to work for her now. If she keeps the vulnerability and adds the operational wins. So, for example, shipping humbled me becomes here's the shipping ecosystem I built this week so our customers always get their packages on time. Or I'm uncomfortable to pitch to retailers becomes here's what I learned from all the retail no's that turned into our first yes. Or even I gave up on building in public because I was building in public wrong and here's how to do it correctly. It has the same heart, the same vulnerability, plus the proof that she's handling it and now able to teach the audience something new. Creating content like this is not always going to be easy. If it was, a lot of us would be a lot more successful, a lot faster, especially when you consider the early stage phase we're all in when it takes time for things to happen. So like in Naomi's case, she might not have a retail partner yet. So she's probably thinking like, oh, I need to be making building in public content now. So here's what I did this week to move my business forward. We've all had those thoughts and probably started to make content from that perspective. I know I'm certainly guilty of that, and it's quite literally why I'm making this episode. But founders really should pause. For example, is now the right time to be talking about retail partners? Is that working for me or against me? How should I structure the content to capture the interest of potential retail partners or if they see it, or share what I've learned to help other founders? Should I structure it in a way that speaks to my customer, asking what stores they might want me to be in? That is the kind of level you need to be thinking at for all of this stuff. If nothing else, if you don't want to answer or worry about all that shit right now, you can truly just like capture the content in real time. And you can always wait until the win to clip the video together and share it to the public later. There's always other content to be made, even if it seems boring. I'll remind you that people literally post videos of them folding their laundry or just talking in their car, eating their lunch. So I'm certain that you can come up with something to talk about right now. So now that we know what not to do when it comes to build in public content, I want to talk about one of my favorite founders who I think has truly nailed how to build in public correctly. Grace Beverly, if you haven't heard of her or heard me talk about her on the podcast, founded Tala, a workout wear company in 2019 with a £0 marketing budget, did over £6 million in sales in 1 year through organic social alone. From the brand's conception, she invited her YouTube community to witness Tala's evolution, and trade press literally refers to her approach as building in public. And Grace shares just as much struggle as Naomi does. She is not great at this content because she's hiding the mess. I think actually Grace reveals a ton. Everything from mistakes to chaos to problems to how the stress has affected her body. But it's the way that she articulates and tells the story. She ends up the hero and the customer doesn't feel negatively impacted. When she launched her new maternity line most recently, she said, quote, "We have been working on this for so long. It was very much worth the 2 years we spent trying to get this right," unquote. She tells you the timeline. She tells you it was hard. She goes on in the same reel to tell a story about the fit model going into labor 12 hours before the campaign shoot. She even says the honest trade-off, which is, quote, "Obviously, it's going to be less sweat wicking than a synthetic material, but it is really, really good, and it won't be for everyone," unquote. When she launched her Shreddy Matcha, she walked through the whole R&D process. 5 tasting bowls, a year-long stretch, what was important for the team to get right, what were the constraints, and I'm not even going to lie, straight up bought that matcha after watching that video because it so clearly articulated what I wasn't currently getting from my Amazon matcha brand. Every single one of Grace's posts has a vulnerable behind-the-scenes beat to it. You can see her personality coming through the camera, and honestly, like same as Naomi, but I want to break down the difference in framing in a little bit more detail. The 2 years Grace talks about isn't chaos or mismanagement, it's rigor, commitment. The labor story isn't a crisis. I think it's proof of how authentic to the consumer experience the line is. And her talking about this honest trade off isn't a product weakness, it's trust and honesty. So there's no misconception. She keeps the heart, the humor, and she's shown how she's navigated challenges and come out triumphant on the other side. So the process makes her more credible instead of less. And that's it. That's the entire difference. I think Naomi really did herself a disservice. She's clearly smart and competent, but she kept the heart and hid how she was solving those challenges. Whereas Grace keeps the heart at the same time, she shows her competence as a founder. And taking it even a step further, Grace is the first person to tell you that she doesn't have it all together or figured out. In one video, she says, quote, every version of growth requires a willingness to look a little bit ridiculous to somebody, unquote. But she says it as someone who has thought it all the way through and is handing you an insight. She's a co-thinker, not a victim, and that's the register you want to keep in mind when you're making your content. Oh, also, another key thing I want to mention is how Grace splits the content across her channels. Her Working Hard podcast and her personal Instagram carry a lot of her founder content. That's where she talks about salary frameworks, leadership misses, what she wasted money on. Whereas her Tala and Shreddy brand accounts stay consumer facing and curated. And when she does post on those channels as a founder, it's videos like those R&D ones, which are designed to show the customer differentiation and encourage them to purchase, which clearly works. Another example, when she got married, the Shreddy brand account got the workout wedding prep angle. So it showed the workouts she was doing, the meal plan, and the results. Whereas her personal TikTok actually got like the wedding video, which by the way hit 6.7 million views. Same event, but with a completely different perspective, tailored to the different audiences, all intentional and thus successful. Now, I want to give an honest and important caveat. I think sometimes building in public works because of the person posting. Take the so-called patron saint of tech build in public. His name is Peter Levels. He's a big deal on Twitter. Shares his Stripe dashboard. He tweets his MRR every month, and he runs his entire business in public, makes 7 figures a year solo. Thousands of indie hackers copied his exact methods and poof, disappeared. You are not reading their retrospectives on why it failed, probably because they don't exist or the algorithm was simply never going to show them to you anyway, since they don't have the audience traction. So all you see is Peter and a handful of others and conclude that build in public works. However, just because it worked for him and others doesn't mean the same will apply to you. And I think a key point in all of this is how we infuse our authentic personality with the building in public content. Copy and pasting someone's version onto yours will feel weird and inauthentic because it is. The framework I just gave you is truly that, a framework. And the reason for that is because you need to showcase your unique POV and infuse your own personality. Like when I think about how I'll post this stuff, it'll probably be infused with some silliness while balancing the aesthetic and the intellectual, just because that's who I am. And I want you to be thinking about not just what's in your script, but how you're presenting it. And like bottom line, if you're not having fun making the content, you're not going to be successful in this endeavor. And I think that's the other key reason why some creators and founders pull ahead. Take Lauren Sudeiko, the founder of Sleep or Die, for example. If you've never heard of her, literally go Google her right now. I found her on Substack and I've truly been watching her content like it's a new Love Island episode. I'm always waiting to see what she's going to do next. And she's very intentional with her social presence, more so than Grace Beverly, I would say. But because she's intentional and the POV is so freaking clear, it works so well. She's been able to generate great early interest in her company and just actually closed her first $1 million round. And now I know what happens for a lot of you right about now, because it happened to me, but you hear share the struggle, but thread the needle carefully enough that you don't mess up. And you go to sit in front of the camera and channel your inner influencer, and something in your stomach turns. It feels like you're wearing a mask. It feels like you're lying. And I want to deal with this head on because this is sort of what trips everybody up. And it's like, what do I show? What do I not show? How do I show it without feeling cringe? At what point does curation become inauthentic? So let's define curation out loud because it actually helps me get over this mental block. Curation is the process of selecting, organizing, and presenting content to make it more valuable, accessible, or meaningful. It's sifting through an overwhelming amount of choices and highlighting only the best or most relevant pieces. The thing that makes curation feel dishonest is not the selection process itself, like every podcast episode you've ever loved was curated by somebody. On the flip side, what makes a curated Instagram feel false is the implicit claim that the curated version is honestly what their life looks like all the time. The wedding photographer who chooses 100 photos from 3,000 is curating, whereas the influencer filming her morning routine at 2 p.m., casually stretching and yawning as if the camera had been rolling all night, is falsifying. None of her footage is technically faked, like she did wake up, but the story the footage is telling implies that this is what her morning actually looks like. So here's sort of the gut check that I would use going forward, which is, would my audience feel betrayed if they saw what I did not show? If the answer is no, you curated. If the answer is yes, then you hid something that your audience had a right to know. Aesthetic curation, which is the part that makes things feel pretty, is fine. The substantive curation, which is sort of the part that hides something your audience had a right to know, is the line that you don't cross. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to recap one more time. This is the sequence you run before you post anything. And again, this is all in the show notes. So copy, paste, screenshot, do what you need to do. First, you're going to decide your 2 to 3 main content pillars, of which founder content is probably one. Then you're going to zoom into that founder content pillar, scrutinize which micro pillar you're choosing, and ensure you've mitigated the risks associated. Then you're going to decide which channel and which audience receives said content. And then one last fail safe before you hit send is your post speaking from scars, not wounds? That's it. Easy peasy. Now, obviously, I'm speaking to you from my soapbox as if I have all of this figured out, and I'll be honest, I don't. But here's what I can tell you for sure. Before I worked all of this out, I was definitely afraid. I was worried I would sully my reputation and my business's future by sharing my work in progress. And now I feel like a woman with a plan. I know what goes where and for whom and when. And with that, I can charge ahead knowing that I'm protecting myself and my brand in the best way possible. And I do think you should build in public. I think the early stage founder stories really need to be heard. They're difficult to find because inherently they're not friends with the algorithm yet. But if building in public can get these stories heard and also build your business at the same time, then that's a twofer in my book. The key is to just get thoughtful. Where, who, what medium, what stays private for the right reasons, and what gets shared for the right reasons. The question was really never whether you should do it. It was how. If you want the written version of all of this, it's up on my Substack, The Well. I will link it down below. And if you want to watch me try to actually live all of what I've just said, that's what my Instagram and my TikTok are for. I'd love it if you followed along. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you found it helpful. I would love to hear how you're thinking about building in public, and if anything in this episode changed your perspective, or if you have any feedback or other things you want me to cover here on the podcast. Make sure you're following on whatever platform you're currently listening on, and I will see you guys next week.